Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So thank you all for listening to our presentation today. And thank you, Professor, for giving us this opportunity to present our ideas that we have kind of worked through last few weeks. And our team consists of Tiffany, Pascal, Rohan, Girish, myself, and special thanks to the alumni auditors. Dhaval was with us for most of time, and thanks to Vijay as well. So all our presentation is through a video, so we'll run through that.
In 2020, COVID-19 had shut down the globe. Due to the droplet transmission of the infection, across the world, people were forced indoors to slow down the spread of the infection, which drove the adoption of a more digital-forward way of thinking. As consultants, we've been given the task to explore how people will generate trust, relationships, and productivity as they collaborate in 2030, which will undoubtedly be different. But how? In our exploration, we discussed a few key drivers that would impact how people would interact and connect in the future, such as pervasiveness of influencers, widening or converging of the economic gap, and social inclusivity, but ultimately determined that the future of collaboration would hinge on two major axes: the perception of reality for humans ranging from more synthetic to more biological, and the migration or ability for people to travel, ranging from restricted to more free-flowing. With the two axes, we see four possible futures. The first we call the Matrix, a world in which people's perceptions of reality are purely synthetic, and the forms of travel are restricted. The second is Cyborg, which represents a world that is free-flowing travel, but still values this synthetic identity or perception of reality. The third we call Tribalism, which has a large focus on the biological identity of people with the restricted communities. And finally, the global citizen, a world in which people are able to travel fast and freely, as well as place more value on their physical presence than their digital selves. To imagine how these futures come into play, we applied these scenarios to Zoom, a leader in modern enterprise video communications, to see how Zoom in 2030 merged digital and physical worlds to create a seamless and impactful digital workspace.
I'd like to introduce our first future, Matrix. This is a scenario where human perception to reality is purely synthetic and all migration or other forms of travel are restricted. People enter computer simulations to perceive reality instead of leaving their safe houses. All interhuman interactions are happening virtually.
This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
Right now, we're inside a computer program?
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. This is the world that you know.
The city streets are abandoned, international borders are closed, and the only operating flights are on government-subsidized domestic routes. How did it come to this? After showing up to 95% effectiveness in clinical trials, in late 2020, several coronavirus vaccines were distributed to the public. However, the virus mutated, and the vaccines were ineffective. The new virus strain was more contagious than the original one. To stop the spread of the pandemic, governments all over the world imposed strict lockdowns, all non-essential businesses were shut, international borders were closed, and all legal immigration was suspended. These measures led to a skyrocketing unemployment rate, which in turn sparked mass protests and riots. Nationalism, already rampant in a decade, reached new heights. Around the same time, Neuralink started their first clinical trials for an implantable brain-machine interface. This technology was continuously further developed over the years to create complete realities inside people's brain. By 2030, people now spend most of their days inside the virtual world. This is where they collaborate with coworkers and meet friends and family.
Welcome to scenario number 2, the global citizen. Let's do a deep dive. In this scenario, we have fast and easy mobility of people, both within the border and across the border. And people love in-person interactions in the physical world. Let's see a small clip.
We would now like to present strategic analysis of the two scenarios. In the matrix scenario, we anticipate development of ecosystems which would lead to high switching costs and therefore low buyer power. Whereas in the global citizen scenario, we anticipate the presence of many competitive players which would lead to high buyer power. Now for the matrix scenario, we propose the following moonshot: a completely immersive synthetic reality office, or CISRO. We envision this to be a fully functional office space hosted entirely on a synthetic reality platform. Employees would use avatars to interact in the synthetic reality environment and fulfill their job functions without leaving their homes. For this moonshot, we advise Zoom to focus on the following capabilities. We advise Zoom to build R&D capabilities in software, electrical, and mechanical engineering disciplines, as well as expertise in design and user experience, which will enable them to provide better experiences for their customers. In addition, we also encourage Zoom to explore partnerships or mergers and acquisitions in hardware enabling companies like Neuralink and Oculus, as well as research agencies like DARPA that will enable them to be on the forefront of this research. Lastly, we encourage Zoom to have partnerships with internet and cloud service providers that would enable priority bandwidth that would be crucial for the success of this product. Now for the global citizen scenario, we propose the following moonshot. Synergesia is a product that enhances in-person collaboration by integrating all your work streams. We envision this to be a cloud-based, device-agnostic software suite that would integrate all the workflows. So think Slack plus G Suite plus SAP and everything in between. This would enhance team collaboration by having all work streams and data at the user's interface and would intelligently recognize the environment and adapt itself. For this particular moonshot, we advise Zoom to focus on the following capabilities. We advise them to build R&D capabilities in software, cloud services, and data science, as well as expertise in blockchain that would enable trust and security across different devices. In addition, we also advise Zoom to build a strong sales force that would enable a multi-tiered channel strategy. On the partnerships and M&A side, we encourage Zoom to explore partnerships with hardware companies that would ensure compatibility with different OS systems, as well as transportation companies that would enable the software to be deployed in in-vehicle devices. And lastly, we again encourage Zoom to explore partnerships with internet and cloud service providers to enable priority bandwidth. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, team. Also nicely done. A few questions for you. Let's see where to start. On the buying power for the first scenario, you say here, switching power, let's see, why should switching power higher in the first scenario, right? But why wouldn't you have the second scenario also be high switching cost? Isn't that a question of the business model? Just because one is purely virtual and the other one is purely or much more physical, doesn't mean that the second one doesn't have to have or has to have lower switching power, right? So what's your answer to that?
So, Professor, the way we envision it, you're right that the second scenario also could possibly have low switching power, like high switching costs. But the way we anticipate the technology development in scenario one, the technology development is going to be more proprietary. So we anticipate the presence of low number of competitors. So that would lead to development of these ecosystems, if you will. But in the second scenario, the global citizen scenario, the technology need not necessarily be that proprietary. So that is why we anticipate with the globalization and with that many different avenues, the number of competitive players to be very high, which is the reason why we focused on a high buyer power in that scenario. So it's purely a play on the number of competitors and the way the technology would be.
Yeah, that does make sense. It's usually a combination of, buyer power is usually a combination of, how many buyers are there relative to how many competitors, okay? But then also, what's the nature of the relationship, right? So one is more quantitative, the other one is more qualitative. And by way of example, right? So if I have a co-creative customer, just like I could have a co-creative or co-development, co-R&D supplier, right? Then the stickiness of the relationship is higher. And then the question is, well, my supplier may be more valuable to me that way, right? Just like the consumer may be more valuable to me that day. So and I'm that way. And so I'm thinking about a physical world where the human being is sort of acting out their physical presence and their physical parameters, possibly yielding higher power for the buyer because they bring that into the digital solution, right? But that's now getting into nuances, right? That are kind of fun to think about. I didn't really expect you to necessarily go that deep. But do let me ask you about the moonshot, the second moonshot. Why not do something? I mean, you're fairly courageous there on the first moonshot. Why not do something even more courageous in scenario two, where if you go back to the moonshot there, you're sort of talking about a cloud-based solution of essentially integrating all the virtual services, right? But in this environment, people are biological. They are deeply physical, okay? And it is actually turning out that our physical bodies are, are very much a part of our intelligence, right? How we process in our neural system throughout our body is very much an integral part of our intelligence. So why not do something a bit more physically integrated here, right? Where we bring that out some more.
So that's a good question, and I'll maybe start off, and my team members can jump in. So the question we asked ourselves was, since the main kind of the thesis behind this was that we as humans have rejected the synthetic aspect of reality. So even the kind of the implants and all of those technology, we felt would be not accepted by folks because the focus would now be more on in-person interaction. Now, if you look at a collaborative workspace, that means how can technology help you without actually us recognizing it's there, right? That seamless integration was the key part, because of the focus on the biological aspect and rejection of the synthetic, aspect of reality. So the focus, we expect the populace mindset to be more about in-person interaction and collaboration of that sort, which would then kind of create the product to be, it's almost as if you don't know it's there. That was kind of that was the main target we had. Like you can use the technology, but it's not invasive at all.
Right. So what you're saying is humans are saying, look, let's keep technology at arm's length. Right. I want it over there. I want it to dip in if I choose to have the option, but I do not want it touching me, as it were.
Exactly. So kind of like if you're living in a completely virtual reality in the Matrix scenario, whereas you are, more of, I wouldn't say necessarily, you're not going back to prehistoric times, but your technology is as less invasive in your daily life as possible.
Okay, and my final question, but then I see Marius has his hand up, and I would encourage anybody else who's got a question to ask it. Always good to get some more participation points, right? Who, in both scenarios, who would you, as a team, think are the chief competitors? You talked to me about the rivalry, or you showed it anyway, but who is like the one type of company that I would need to watch out for as potentially equally or more so having disruption potential?
Sorry,
go ahead, Pascal.
So in the Matrix scenario, I can see two big companies that could do this. Neuralink, that's the one we also showed in the video, that is backed by Musk. So he could build its own company and build this technology. And the second company I would see is probably Facebook, because they already acquired Oculus. So they're already going down that path. So these are the two companies I would expect to see, like being our hardest competitors. In the second scenario, I would expect it to be either Google or Microsoft. Microsoft is already working with teams on really being a fully integrated workflow. And actually, I would probably, since last week, probably to add now Salesforce to that mix as well, because they just acquired Slack. So they're also building an integrated software suite.
Got it. Why Google for the second, but not the first scenario?
It's Google could also be in the first one. They do a lot of crazy things, so I'm sure they could also be there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me build the case for you, and I mentioned this to the UC Berkeley team as well, right? If we at UC Berkeley have anything going for us that is a real asset over Google, it's trust, because we're a public institution and they are not. And I'm not saying we should be distrusting Google by any means, but trust is not the first thing that comes to mind when I think about Google, right? And so you do want to be careful there with trust. But then the other question, and I get that this is a bit of a curveball, why only American companies?
So, Professor, I think to answer your question about what companies, I would kind of refer to Cheryl's presentation earlier, right? I think at this point, we are kind of predicting the future. So that would, answering your question would be a little bit tricky in that sense, because if you look at the Matrix scenario, right, we are focusing on Neuralink and Oculus because that's a technology we know. But that's also a moonshot where we don't know what technology is going to be the driver, right? At this point, we can speculate, definitely. So I would say, yes, we are focusing on Oculus and Neuralink because that's kind of what our research was based on. But to answer your question about why only American, the answer would be the company could be any company which would develop that technology, and we would not know that. So which is why one of our recommendations for Zoom was to compete, sort of partner with companies like, research agencies like DARPA, so that Zoom is the company that's forefront of that research.
Yeah.
So,
and adding on to, sorry, Rohan, continue.
Yeah, go ahead, Krish.
So adding on to Rohan's point, right, we strongly believe the data privacy laws are going to be very stricter moving forward. And people will have a lot more trust from an American company trying to sell, let's say, in some part of Southeast Asia or Europe, rather than an Asian company coming and selling in US. So I think that's one of the drivers. And going back to your question, which is one company that we worry about, I believe it's Facebook, because Facebook has got two plays in there. One is they're in consumer market. Now they have an opportunity to get into enterprise space, which they are trying, and they have failed miserably over the last year or so. And also they have technology for AR, VR. And so they have they're very well poised to get into both the enterprise space, coming into the global citizen, as well as getting into with Oculus more augmented AR VR.
Yeah, and incidentally, Girish, I just had a speaker from Facebook who is an AR VR lead in my AI course that I'm also teaching at Haas. And they just acquired a few companies in BCI, BMI. So you guys are spot on here. The side comment that I would ask you not to repeat is that they don't seem to have been putting a lot of thinking into what the technologies could be doing to sort of in terms of second, third order effects on the human brain, you know, when you start putting stuff into the human brain. But to be fair to them, I also did not hear a cross section of people from Facebook, but they're very much forging into that, at least as much as anybody else. I would say, you know, the other thing, and this is sort of a general warning to all of us, right? And I'm sort of falling victim to this as well, or I should call myself a perpetrator, right? In that we oftentimes think just because we're not hearing anything out of China means that there's nothing happening. And I think the opposite is true, that there's probably a lot happening that they're not talking about, or that's not being publicized because most of us don't speak Mandarin. And even if we did, we may not be reading deep tech Mandarin sources, right? So I would encourage all of us to watch out for the Chinese in this space as well. There's absolutely no reason for me to believe, once I question myself, why the Americans but not the Chinese should be capable. But I do think Girish makes a great point, and that's exactly how you should be arguing this in these types of presentations, which is, look, in this scenario, what we're predicting is that trust is a big factor in the Western societies. And just like we're now, you know, prohibiting TikTok in the US or keeping Huawei from building networks in Europe, you know, being a Chinese BCI BMI provider probably will encounter some hurdles, right? And whether we can lower those hurdles or they can lower the hurdles in future is an untold part of the story. But I think from what you guys know right now, it was very well argued. Okay, Marius, do you want to close us out?
Yeah,